The old truck coughed one last time before the engine finally died. Rachel sat behind the wheel, staring at the fuel gauge that had been sitting on empty for the last 10 miles. She'd made it, though. Barely. Through the dusty windshield, she could see the wooden cabin sitting against the mountain ridge. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the property. This was it. The address from the online posting. Her last option. She stepped out onto the gravel driveway, her legs stiff from the 4-hour drive. The mountain air hit her immediately, crisp and cold, so different from the stale apartment air she'd been breathing for months. Well, the apartment she used to have. That was gone now, along with everything else. Rachel grabbed her suitcase from the back seat. It wasn't heavy. Everything she owned fit into one bag now. Funny how a whole life could shrink down like that. 6 months ago, she had a decent job, a nice place, plans for the future. Then the company downsized. Then her roommate moved out. Then the bills started piling up faster than she could count them. The cabin door opened before she could knock. The man who stood there was tall, probably in his early 40s, with dark hair that needed a trim and a beard that had gone a few days too long without attention. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, showing forearms that looked like they'd spent years doing actual work, not typing on keyboards. "You the one who called about the job?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "Yes, sir. I'm Rachel. We spoke on the phone yesterday." He nodded slowly, his gray eyes taking her in. She knew what he was seeing. A woman in her late 20s, too thin, wearing jeans that had seen better days and a jacket that wasn't quite warm enough for mountain weather. Someone who looked exactly like what she was. Desperate. "Ben," he said simply. "Come on, I'll show you around." The property was bigger than she'd expected. Behind the main cabin, there was a large garden area, currently bare for the approaching winter. A workshop sat off to one side, and beyond that a barn with peeling red paint. "Need help with general upkeep," Ben explained as they walked. His hands were shoved in his pockets, and he didn't look at her while he talked. "Garden work in season, repairs, splitting wood, that sort of thing. It's physical work. Long days." "I can handle it," Rachel said quickly, maybe too quickly because he finally turned to look at her. "You ever done farm work before?" "I've done hard work," she said, which wasn't exactly an answer. The truth was, the hardest physical labor she'd done was moving furniture between apartments. But she'd learned something important over the past few months. When you're drowning, you figure out how to swim real fast. They stopped near the barn. Rachel could hear chickens clucking somewhere inside. "The posting didn't mention pay," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I should be honest with you. I don't need much. Just enough for food and a place to stay. I saw the barn back there. I can sleep there. I'm not picky. Just give me work and I'll earn my keep." The words tumbled out faster than she wanted them to. She hated how desperate she sounded, but there was no point pretending otherwise. Her bank account had $12 in it. Her phone was one missed payment away from being shut off. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. Ben stopped walking. He turned to face her fully for the first time, and something in his expression shifted. It wasn't pity exactly, more like recognition, as if he'd seen that kind of desperation before and knew exactly what it looked like. "You drove 4 hours to ask if you could sleep in my barn?" Rachel lifted her chin. "I drove 4 hours because I need work, and your ad was the only one that didn't require references or experience. I'll work harder than anyone else you could hire. I promise you that." The wind picked up, cutting through her thin jacket. She tried not to shiver. Ben was quiet for a long moment, studying her in a way that made her want to fidget. But she held still, meeting his eyes. She'd learned something else recently. Sometimes all you had left was the ability to stand your ground even when everything in you wanted to run. "How long since you ate?" he asked suddenly. The question caught her off guard. "I had some crackers this morning." "That's not what I asked." Rachel's stomach chose that exact moment to growl, answering for her. Heat rushed to her face. Ben shook his head, something almost like frustration crossing his features. "Come on." He walked back toward the cabin, and after a moment's hesitation, Rachel followed. The inside was warmer, heated by a wood stove in the corner. The space was simple but clean. A kitchen area, a living room with worn furniture, and a hallway that probably led to bedrooms. Everything looked handmade, solid, built to last. "Sit," Ben said, pointing to the kitchen table. Rachel sat, her suitcase still clutched in one hand. She watched as Ben moved around the kitchen with surprising efficiency, pulling out bread, cheese, some leftover chicken. He didn't speak while he worked, and she didn't dare break the silence. He set a plate in front of her, along with a glass of water. Eat. Rachel wanted to be polite, to eat slowly, but her body had other ideas. She was halfway through the sandwich before she remembered to breathe. Ben leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her with that unreadable expression. "Thank you," she managed between bites. He nodded once. "About the barn," Rachel's heart sank. Here it came. He was going to tell her this wouldn't work, that she should head back to wherever she came from, except she had nowhere to go back to. "No one sleeps in my barn," Ben said firmly. "You want to work here, fine. But you'll sleep in an actual room with actual walls and a real bed." Rachel froze, the sandwich halfway to her mouth. "I don't understand. Guest room is down the hall. Small, but it's warm and dry. You'll take your meals in here. Work starts at sunrise. We'll try it for a week, see how it goes. That work for you?" She stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. This man, this stranger, was offering her not just work, but actual hospitality. It felt too good to be true, and her experience had taught her that things that seemed too good usually were. Why? The question came out before she could stop it. Ben was quiet for a moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he wasn't sure he wanted to say. "Because nobody should have to sleep in a barn just to survive," he finally said. "And because everyone deserves a chance to get back on their feet. Now finish eating. I'll show you the room." Rachel looked down at her plate, unexpected tears burning in her eyes. She'd been holding herself together for months, refusing to break, refusing to give up. But this simple act of kindness from a stranger hit something deep inside her that she'd been protecting. "Thank you," she whispered, and this time she meant it with everything she had. Ben just nodded and turned away, giving her a moment to collect herself. Through the window, she could see the sun starting to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Maybe this was a new beginning. Or maybe it was just a temporary stop before the next disaster. Either way, for the first time in months, Rachel felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. The guest room was smaller than Rachel expected, but it felt like a palace compared to where she'd been sleeping lately. A twin bed sat against one wall, covered with a thick quilt that looked handmade. There was a small dresser, a lamp on a nightstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. But what caught her attention was how prepared everything seemed. The bed had fresh sheets. There were towels folded on the dresser. A small heater in the corner was already warming the space. This wasn't a room that had been thrown together at the last minute. Someone had taken time to make it comfortable. "Bathrooms across the hall," Ben said from the doorway. "Hot water takes a minute to get going, but it works. I'll wake you at sunrise." He was gone before Rachel could thank him again. She sat on the edge of the bed, her suitcase beside her, and let out a long breath. The mattress was firm but comfortable. Real pillows. Real blankets. After 3 weeks of sleeping on her friend's couch and then 2 nights in her truck, this felt almost too good. Rachel allowed herself 5 minutes of just sitting there, taking it in. Then she unpacked her suitcase, which took all of 2 minutes since she barely owned anything anymore. She hung up her 3 shirts, put her 2 pairs of jeans in the dresser, and lined up her worn-out sneakers by the door. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to unfamiliar sounds. Wind moving through the trees, an owl somewhere in the distance, the old cabin settling. No traffic noise, no neighbors arguing through thin walls, no sirens, just quiet. She thought about calling her sister, but what would she even say? Besides, her phone was nearly dead and she didn't see a charger anywhere. Tomorrow, she'd figure everything out tomorrow. The sunrise came earlier than Rachel was ready for. A knock on her door pulled her from sleep, and Ben's voice came through the wood. 15 minutes. Meet me in the kitchen." Rachel dragged herself up, splashed cold water on her face in the bathroom, and pulled on her oldest jeans and a sweatshirt. When she made it to the kitchen, Ben was already there with 2 mugs of coffee and what looked like oatmeal. "You drink coffee?" he asked. "I do now," Rachel said, reaching for the mug like it was a lifeline. They ate in silence. Ben didn't seem like much of a morning talker, which was fine with Rachel. She was still trying to wake up properly, and the oatmeal was warm and filling in a way that made her realize how long it had been since she'd had a real breakfast. "We'll start with the wood," Ben said, pushing back from the table. "Winter's coming fast up here." Need to get at least 2 more cords split and stacked before the serious cold hits. Rachel had no idea what a cord of wood was, but she nodded like she did. The work was brutal. Ben showed her how to use the axe, demonstrating the proper stance and swing. It looked easy when he did it. The log split clean in half with one solid hit. When Rachel tried, the axe bounced off the wood and nearly flew out of her hands. Again, Ben said. She tried again, and again, and again. Her shoulders started burning after the first 20 minutes. After an hour, her hands were blistered even through the work gloves Ben had given her. After 2 hours, she wasn't sure she could lift her arms anymore. Ben worked steadily beside her, not saying much, just the steady rhythm of his axe hitting wood. Split, stack, repeat. He made it look effortless. Around noon, he finally stopped. Break time. Rachel collapsed onto a nearby stump, her whole body shaking. She tried to hide it, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Ben handed her a water bottle and a sandwich. You did good for your first day. I'm slowing you down, Rachel said, taking a long drink. You could do this twice as fast without me. Maybe, but that's not the point. Then what is the point? Ben was quiet for a moment, looking out at the mountains. Point is teaching you so you can do it yourself. Everything worth doing takes time to learn. They ate their lunch in the shade of the workshop. Rachel noticed things she hadn't seen the day before. The property was well maintained, but clearly a one-man operation. The fence line had spots that needed repair. The garden beds would need turning before spring. The barn's paint was peeling. How long have you been up here? Rachel asked. 8 years, give or take. By yourself? Ben nodded, taking a bite of his sandwich. He didn't offer more, and Rachel got the sense that pushing for information wouldn't go well. Some people came to the mountains to get away from something. She understood that better than most. The afternoon was more wood splitting. Rachel's technique improved slightly, though her muscles screamed in protest. Ben corrected her stance a few times, showing her how to use her whole body instead of just her arms. It helped, but not enough. By the time the sun started setting, Rachel felt like she'd been hit by a truck. Every muscle ached. Her hands were raw despite the gloves. She could barely grip the axe handle anymore. That's enough for today, Ben said, sinking his axe into the chopping block. Go clean up. Dinner in an hour. Rachel stumbled back to the cabin, peeled off her sweaty clothes, and stood under the hot shower until the water started running cold. She watched the water circle the drain and wondered if she'd actually be able to move tomorrow. This was only day 1. Dinner was simple: grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and bread. Ben had cooked while she showered, and the food was better than anything Rachel had made for herself in months. They ate at the kitchen table again, the silence more comfortable now than it had been at breakfast. I won't lie to you, Rachel said, setting down her fork. I'm not sure I can do this. That was the hardest physical work I've ever done, and you were probably going easy on me. Ben looked at her, his gray eyes steady. I was going easy on you. Rachel laughed despite herself. Great, but you didn't quit. You didn't complain. You kept swinging that axe even when I could see your hands shaking. He paused. That counts for something. Does it count enough to let me stay? 1 week trial, remember? We're 1 day in. Let's see how the rest goes. That night, Rachel lay in bed, barely able to move. Her whole body hurt in ways she didn't know were possible. She thought about leaving in the morning, just getting in her truck and heading. Where? Back to the city where she had nothing? To her sister's place where she'd already worn out her welcome? No, she'd made it through today. She could make it through tomorrow. Through the walls, she heard Ben moving around in another part of the cabin, the sound of him working in what must be his workshop, even this late. The steady rhythm of tools on wood. It was oddly comforting, knowing she wasn't completely alone out here. Rachel pulled the heavy quilt up to her chin. Her hands throbbed. Her shoulders ached. But underneath all that pain, there was something else, something she'd been missing for a long time. Purpose. She'd gotten through day 1. Tomorrow she'd get through day 2. And the day after that, and the day after that. 1 axe swing at a time, 1 log at a time. She'd prove that she belonged here. The mountain wind whispered against the window, and Rachel closed her eyes. Tomorrow would hurt, but tomorrow she'd be stronger. By the 3rd day, Rachel could barely lift her arms above her shoulders. By the 5th day, she noticed calluses forming on her palms. By the end of the 1st week, something strange happened. She stopped counting the days. Ben had been right about one thing. Her body was adapting. The work was still hard, but it didn't feel impossible anymore. She could split wood for an hour without her hands shaking. She could carry 2 water buckets from the well instead of 1. Small victories, but they felt huge. "You're getting stronger," Ben said one morning, watching her sink an axe clean through a log on the second swing. Rachel wiped sweat from her forehead, breathing hard. Either that or the wood's getting softer. The corner of Ben's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. In the week she'd been here, she'd learned that was about as good as it got with him. The trial week came and went without discussion. Ben didn't tell her to leave, and Rachel didn't ask if she could stay. They just kept working. It became an unspoken agreement, settled somewhere between the morning coffee and the evening meals they shared in comfortable silence. Then the weather changed. Rachel woke on her 10th day to a different kind of quiet. The kind that felt heavy, pressing down on everything. She looked out her window and saw dark clouds gathering over the mountain peaks, moving fast. At breakfast, Ben was studying the sky through the kitchen window, his jaw tight. "Storm coming," he said. "Big one. We need to prep." They spent the morning securing everything that could blow away. Tools went into the workshop. The chickens got extra feed and water. Ben checked the generator twice, then had Rachel help him stack firewood on the covered porch, close to the door. "How bad are mountain storms?" Rachel asked, carrying another armload. "Bad enough. Could last a few days if we're unlucky." By early afternoon, the first drops started falling. Within an hour, it was a downpour. Wind howled around the cabin, rattling the windows. Rachel stood in the kitchen, watching the sky turn almost black, and felt a flutter of worry in her chest. "Ever been in a real storm before?" Ben asked, coming to stand beside her. "I've seen rain." "This isn't rain. This is the mountain reminding you who's in charge." He moved away from the window. "Come on, might as well make dinner early." "We're not going anywhere." They worked side by side in the kitchen, Ben showing her how to make stew from scratch. Not from a can or a recipe, just from knowing what went together. Onions, carrots, potatoes, some of the chicken from yesterday. He moved with the same efficiency he brought to everything else, no wasted motion. "You cook a lot?" Rachel asked, chopping vegetables the way he'd shown her. "Had to learn. Can't exactly order takeout up here." "Is that why you came? To get away from everything?" Ben was quiet for a long moment, and Rachel thought maybe she'd pushed too far. But then he spoke, his voice lower than usual. "I had a business down in the valley. Construction company. Built it from nothing over 15 years. He paused, stirring the pot. "Then I had a divorce that took most of it. The business, the house, pretty much everything, including my daughter." Rachel stopped chopping. This was more than Ben had said about himself since she'd arrived. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Her mother got full custody. Made it hard for me to see her. Then harder. Then impossible." He kept stirring, not looking at Rachel. "I tried fighting it for a while, but lawyers are expensive and I was already drowning. So I sold what was left, bought this place, and figured I'd start over where nobody could take anything else from me." The wind hammered against the cabin, but inside it felt still, sacred almost, like Ben had opened a door he didn't often unlock. "How old was she?" "Your daughter?" 12 when I left. She'd be 20 now." Ben finally looked at Rachel. "That guest room you're staying in? I fixed it up for her. Thought maybe one day she'd want to visit, see what I'd built up here, but she never came." Rachel felt something break open in her chest. All this time she'd been sleeping in a room meant for someone else. Someone Ben had been hoping would find her way home. "That's why you let me stay," she said softly. "When I showed up desperate, asking to sleep in the barn." Ben turned back to the stove. "Maybe. Or maybe I just needed the help. Does it matter?" "It matters to me." They ate dinner as the storm raged outside, the cabin shaking with each gust of wind. Rain hammered the roof like 1,000 tiny drums. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. "Generator should kick in," Ben said, standing up, but it didn't. They waited in the darkness. "Listening. Nothing. Stay here," Ben said, grabbing a flashlight. "I need to check it." "In this storm? Are you crazy?" "Generator's in the shed. It's 20 feet away." "Then I'm coming with you." Ben looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Rachel's expression stopped him. "Fine, but stay close." They stepped out into chaos. The wind nearly knocked Rachel off her feet. Rain came at them sideways, soaking through her jacket in seconds. She grabbed onto Ben's arm as they fought their way to the shed. Inside, Ben checked the generator with quick, practiced movements. "Fuel line's clogged," he shouted over the wind. "I can fix it, but it'll take time." "Then let's do it." They worked together in the cramped shed. Ben's flashlight clutched between Rachel's teeth while he cleared the line and reconnected everything. Her hands were numb from cold, and she could barely feel her feet, but she held the light steady. When the generator finally kicked on, the relief was immediate. They stumbled back to the cabin, both of them drenched and shivering. The lights inside glowed like a beacon. Ben disappeared down the hall and came back with towels and dry clothes. "Change," he ordered. "I'll heat up the stew." By the time Rachel returned to the kitchen in borrowed sweatpants and one of Ben's old hoodies, warmth was coming back into her fingers. Ben had the stew reheated and 2 mugs of something that smelled like whiskey and honey. "Drink," he said, handing her a mug. "It'll help." Rachel took a sip and felt warmth spread through her chest. "What is this?" "Old family recipe. Good for storms and bad days." They sat at the kitchen table listening to the wind howl. The cabin felt smaller somehow, cozier, like the storm had pushed them closer together whether they wanted it or not. "Thank you for helping with the generator," Ben said finally. "Didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. We're partners in this, aren't we? That's how it works." Ben studied her over his mug, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Rachel saw something shift in his expression. Not just acceptance, but respect. Maybe even the beginning of trust. "I've been on my own a long time," he said quietly. "Got used to not depending on anyone." "I know the feeling," Rachel said. "I've been on my own too. Different reasons maybe, but same result. You stop letting people in because it's safer that way." "Is it though? Safer?" Rachel thought about the past few weeks. The exhaustion, the sore muscles, the hard work, but also the warm meals, the comfortable bed, the feeling that she was building something instead of just surviving. "No," she admitted. "I don't think it is." The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin something had changed. 2 people who'd been running from their old lives had somehow found themselves in the same place, building something new. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both felt it. The mountain had brought them together. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly where they were supposed to be. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of being trapped inside with nowhere to go and nothing to do but exist in each other's space. Rachel had worried it would be awkward, but something unexpected happened instead. They talked, not at first. The first day was mostly silence, both of them reading or working on separate projects. But by the second day, when Ben was repairing a chair leg at the kitchen table and Rachel was mending a tear in her jacket, the quiet started filling itself with words. "What did you do before?" Ben asked suddenly. "Before you came here?" Rachel looked up from her stitching. "I worked at a marketing firm. Nothing fancy. Just a regular office job answering to people who didn't know my name." "You miss it?" "I miss the paycheck. And I guess I miss feeling like I had my life figured out even if I didn't really." She tied off a thread. "Turns out I was 1 bad month away from losing everything." "That's a scary thing to learn about yourself." Ben nodded slowly, testing the chair leg. "Most people are. They just don't know it yet." "Is that what happened to you? 1 bad month?" "More like 1 bad year. But yeah, similar idea. You build something, think it's solid, then one crack appears and the whole thing comes down." He set the chair upright, satisfied with his work. "Difference is up here. I'm the only one who can knock things down. Nobody else gets that power anymore." Rachel understood that more than she wanted to admit. There was safety in isolation. No one could hurt you if you didn't let them close enough. By the 3rd day of the storm, they'd moved from small talk to deeper waters. Ben showed her his workshop, the real heart of his life on the mountain. Every surface was covered with projects in various stages of completion. Furniture mostly, but also intricate carvings and small wooden boxes with delicate hinges. "This is beautiful," Rachel said, running her hand over a half-finished table. The wood was smooth as glass, the joints seamless. "It's what I do when I can't sleep, which is most nights." Ben picked up a piece of sandpaper and went back to work on a chair arm. "Keeps my hands busy, keeps my mind quiet." Rachel watched him work for a while, the steady rhythm of the sandpaper against wood. There was something meditative about it, peaceful in a way she hadn't expected. "Can you teach me?" she asked. Ben looked up, surprised. "Woodworking? Why not?" "I'm learning everything else." He considered this, then nodded toward a simple wooden box on the shelf. "Start with something basic. I'll show you how to sand it properly. Everything else builds from there." They spent the rest of the afternoon like that, Ben teaching her the basics, How to feel the grain of the wood. How to know when you'd sanded enough. How to be patient with the process instead of rushing to the end. You're good at this, Ben said as the light started fading outside. I'm just sanding a box. No, you're paying attention. That's different. Most people don't actually pay attention to what they're doing. They're thinking about the next thing or the last thing or anything except what's right in front of them. Rachel thought about that. He was right. For the first time in months, maybe years, she was actually present, not worrying about bills or jobs or what came next. Just here, in this moment, learning something new from someone who cared enough to teach her. When the storm finally broke on the fourth morning, the world outside looked scrubbed clean. The sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at, and everything sparkled with leftover rain. Come on, Ben said after breakfast. Want to show you something? They hiked up the mountain behind the cabin, following a trail Rachel hadn't noticed before. The climb was steep and her legs burned from the effort, but she kept pace with Ben without complaining. He noticed she could tell even though he didn't say anything. At the top, the view opened up to reveal the entire valley below. Mountains stretched in every direction, covered in trees that were just starting to turn colors. The air was so clear Rachel felt like she could see forever. This is why I stayed, Ben said quietly. After everything fell apart, I came up here one day and stood right here. And I realized that all those things I'd lost, they seemed pretty small compared to this. Rachel understood what he meant. The problems that had felt overwhelming in the city, the desperate scrambling to keep her head above water, all of it felt distant up here. Not gone, not solved, but smaller somehow. More manageable. Do you ever regret it? She asked. Leaving everything behind? Every day at first. Now? He shook his head. Not really. I regret how it happened. The choices that led me here. But being here? No. They sat on a flat rock, letting the sun warm their faces. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't empty, though. It was full of understanding, of two people who'd found themselves in the same place for different reasons but somehow fit together anyway. I need to tell you something, Rachel said finally. I haven't been completely honest with you. Ben looked at her, his expression unreadable. When I got here, I told myself this was temporary, that I'd save up some money, get back on my feet and head back to the city. Start over properly. She picked at a piece of moss on the rock. But I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to go back. So don't. It's not that simple, isn't it? Ben turned to face her fully. You're doing good work here. You pull your weight. And honestly, it's been nice having someone else around. The place feels less empty. Rachel felt her throat tighten. I'm not your daughter, Ben. I can't replace what you lost. I know that. His voice was gentle but firm. I'm not asking you to. That room sat empty for years because I was holding on to something that wasn't coming back. Maybe it's time I accepted that and let it be something else. Let it be yours if you want it. Just like that. Just like that. He stood up, offering her his hand. Now come on. We've got work to do and I want to teach you how to repair fence posts before winter really hits. Rachel took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. But before they started back down the trail, she stopped him. Ben? Yeah? Thank you. For seeing me when I showed up at your door. For not turning me away when you probably should have. She paused, trying to find the right words. For giving me a chance when I had nothing left to offer. Ben was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. You had more to offer than you knew. You still do? They walked back down the mountain together, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. Something had shifted between them during those 3 storm-locked days. They weren't just employer and worker anymore, weren't just two people sharing space out of necessity. They were becoming something else, something that didn't have an easy name but felt right anyway. That evening, Rachel sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Ben came out and handed her a mug of coffee, then sat down beside her in the other chair. You know, he said after a while, when you showed up asking to sleep in the barn, I almost said no. Almost sent you away. Why didn't you? Because I saw something in your eyes. Same thing I used to see in the mirror. Someone who was tired of running but didn't know how to stop. He took a sip of his coffee. Figured maybe we could both learn. Rachel smiled, holding the warm mug between her hands. Are we learning? Getting there, Ben said. And this time he smiled back. A real one. Not just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. They sat together as darkness fell, the mountain settling into its evening sounds around them. Two people who'd lost their way had somehow found each other in the middle of nowhere. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly where they both needed to be. 3 months passed like water running downhill. Steady, natural, inevitable. Rachel's hands were covered in calluses now, marks of honest work that she wore with pride. She could split a cord of wood in half the time it took when she first arrived. She knew which boards in the porch creaked, which burner on the stove ran hot, and exactly how Ben liked his coffee in the morning. The cabin had become home in a way her city apartment never was. Not just a place to sleep, but a place that felt like it belonged to her as much as she belonged to it. Winter had settled over the mountain in earnest. Snow covered everything in white, making the world quiet and clean. Ben taught her how to read animal tracks in the fresh powder, how to keep the paths clear, how to make sure the chickens stayed warm enough in the barn. They worked together now with an easy rhythm, like a dance they'd practiced for years instead of months. Ben would start a task and Rachel would fall in step beside him, often knowing what needed to happen before he had to say it. But something else had changed too, something neither of them talked about directly but both felt humming in the air between them. It started small, Ben's hand on her shoulder when she did something right, Rachel making his favorite meal without being asked. The way they'd sit closer together on the porch in the evenings until their shoulders were almost touching. One morning, Rachel woke to find fresh flowers on the kitchen table. Wild ones from somewhere on the mountain, arranged in a mason jar. Ben was already outside working, acting like nothing unusual had happened. She stood there for a long time, looking at those flowers, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. That afternoon, while Ben was in the workshop, Rachel's phone rang for the first time in weeks. Her sister. She'd forgotten she'd even given her this number. Rachel? Oh my God, you're alive. I've been so worried. I'm fine, Claire. Better than fine, actually. Where are you? Are you still at that weird mountain place? Rachel looked out the window at the snow-covered property, at Ben's workshop with smoke curling from its chimney. Yeah, I'm still here. You've been gone for 3 months. When are you coming back? I found some job listings I can send you. Nothing great, but it's a start. Rachel felt something tighten in her chest. I'm not coming back. Silence on the other end. Then, what do you mean you're not coming back? You can't just live on some mountain with a stranger forever. He's not a stranger anymore. And this isn't temporary, Claire. This is my life now. Have you lost your mind? You had a career, friends, a future. You're throwing all that away to what? Chop wood and live like a hermit? I had a job that didn't care if I existed. I had an apartment I could barely afford. And I had a future that looked exactly like my present, just stretched out until I got too old to care anymore. Rachel's voice was steady, certain. That's not living. This is living, more silence. Then Claire's voice, softer now. Are you happy there? Rachel thought about it. Really thought about it. Yeah, I really am. Then I guess that's all that matters. Claire sighed. Just promise you'll visit sometime. And maybe let me know you're alive more than once a season? I promise. After she hung up, Rachel stood in the kitchen feeling lighter somehow, like she'd cut a rope that had been holding her to something she'd already left behind. That evening, she and Ben were working in the workshop together. He was teaching her how to make dovetail joints, his hands guiding hers as she positioned the chisel. You're getting good at this, he said, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. I have a good teacher. Ben didn't move away. His hand was still over hers on the chisel, and Rachel became very aware of how close they were standing. How easy it would be to turn around, how much she wanted to. Rachel, Ben said quietly, I need to tell you something. She did turn then and found him looking at her with an expression she'd never seen before, something open and vulnerable and terrified all at once. When you showed up here, I wasn't looking for anything. I'd convinced myself I was fine being alone, that I didn't need anyone. He paused, struggling with the words. But these past few months, having you here, working beside you, talking to you, I realized I was just existing. Not living. Just going through the motions. Rachel's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. You made this place feel alive again, Ben continued. You made me feel alive again. And I know this probably isn't what you signed up for when you came looking for work, but I need you to know that I don't want you here just because you're helpful. I want you here because I can't imagine this place without you anymore. Ben, Rachel started, but he held up a hand. Let me finish. I know I'm not good at this, at feelings and talking and all the things you're supposed to do. I've been alone too long, but I'm trying to tell you that you don't have to sleep in that guest room anymore. Not because it was meant for someone else, but because he took a breath. Because I want you next to me. If that's something you want too. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. Happy tears. The kind she hadn't cried in so long she'd forgotten what they felt like. I came here with nothing, she said softly. No money, no plan, no hope. I was ready to sleep in a barn just for a chance to survive another week. And you gave me so much more than that. You gave me purpose. You gave me skills. You gave me a home. She reached up, touching his face. And somewhere along the way, you gave me your heart, didn't you? Ben leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. Yeah, I did. Good, Rachel said. Because you already have mine. He kissed her then, gentle and careful like she was something precious. And maybe she was. Maybe they both were. Two broken people who'd found each other in the middle of nowhere and somehow made each other whole. When they pulled apart, Ben rested his forehead against hers. So you'll stay? Where else would I go? This is home. That night, Rachel moved her things out of the guest room. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because sleeping next to Ben felt right in a way that made her previous life feel like a dream she'd woken up from. They lay in bed together, the mountain quiet around them, and Rachel thought about the journey that brought her here. How she'd driven up that gravel driveway with $12 to her name and no idea what would happen next. She'd been looking for work, for survival, for anything to keep her from going under. But what she found was so much more. She found a man who saw her when she felt invisible, who taught her she was stronger than she knew, who gave her a place to belong when she had nowhere else to go. What are you thinking about? Ben asked, his arm around her. About how I almost slept in the barn. Ben chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest. Best job interview I ever had. Woman shows up desperate enough to sleep with the chickens. Ends up changing my whole life. Our whole lives, Rachel corrected. Our whole lives, Ben agreed. Outside, the first snow of the evening began to fall, covering the mountain in fresh white. Inside, two people who'd been running from their pasts had finally stopped running. They'd found something neither of them expected. They'd found each other. They'd found home. And they'd found that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when you're desperate enough to take a chance on something completely unknown. Rachel closed her eyes, warm and safe and exactly where she needed to be. The woman who'd offered to sleep in a barn now slept beside a man who'd given her the world. And she wouldn't trade it for anything.